So the American Horse Council was formed in 1969 to serve as the unified voice of the equine industry in Washington, D.C. We are a bipartisan advocacy organization that seeks to address the social, economic, and legislative interests of the U.S. horse industry. As you are no doubt aware, the horse industry can be very diverse, and that often means that we can't get consensus around certain issues. So what we do at the council, our strategy is to work on issues where we can get consensus or we can coalesce around solutions. When the industry is split on an issue, to avoid further divisiveness, the council speaks to all sides of that matter, but we remain neutral. So we're going to hear a number of topics today in our respective committee meetings. We hope you'll hang around and hear the following meetings afterwards. We're on a virtual platform for the first time, and we're using Zoom. If you're like me, you've done a lot of Zoom in the last few months, so you probably know all the tricks, but just to be sure, we've put everyone on mute to eliminate background noise. If you have something you'd like to contribute to the conversation, you can go to the bottom on your toolbar, you can stick it in the chat, and we'll address your questions or let you speak. If we have an opportunity later on in the program, we're going to have a little open discussion. We'll unmute and we'll let everybody contribute to that. And so now, normally I would turn this over to our committee chair, which is Christine Tauber from the United States Equestrian Federation. But Christine had a conflict today and could not join us. So Billy Smith and Gary Carpenter are sort of going to help be eyes and ears for me and help me sort of facilitate this. And I really appreciate their help. And I am the staff liaison for this committee. So I'm going to sort of be navigating this, and hopefully we will work our way quickly through this agenda. So with that, let me kind of give you some context. Here's what this committee's purpose is: to monitor issues that may impact the viability of horse shows and competitions and public perception of horses and riders engaged in competition. Topics may include, but are not limited to, rider safety, immigration, horse transport, and horse welfare. We seek to identify and prioritize concerns and opportunities, evaluate related information, and determine actions or activities that may be necessary. So that's who we are and what we do. So with that, we're going to jump into the agenda. So first up, we have old business. And we have Brian Grindle, the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at the American Horse Council. There he's raising his hand and waving at everybody. Brian's going to talk to us about the PAST Act, the Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act. He's going to give us an update on the Great American Outdoors Act and some trails issues. He is going to give us an update on H-2B visas and some COVID relief measures. And then we're going to segue over to Cliff Williamson, our Director of Health and Regulatory. Cliff's going to talk about some challenges we've got with the United States Department of Agriculture. He's going to talk a little bit about import-export issues. He's going to cover disaster relief. With these wildfires, we've had a lot of questions about disaster relief. So he's going to hit that. He's going to talk about the importance of microchipping. That's something we really want to press. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the FIT Act. The FIT Act stands for Personal Health Investment Today. So there's some opportunities there. So with that, Brian, unmute yourself and give us your report.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Can y'all hear me okay? Good deal. So as everyone knows, we did have an historic victory in the House of Representatives last summer. In June, the House lawmakers passed the PAST Act by an overwhelming majority. And since then, the horse industry has worked to increase support in the Senate, which has been a challenge. That said, the bill has gained 51 co-sponsors, which is good news. This year alone, HC members have sent more than 460 letters to their senators urging support for the bill. The campaign has focused on members of the Commerce Committee, which is the bill's panel of jurisdiction. Although the PAST Act has made more progress the past 2 years than during any other Congress, the bill is more unlikely to pass the Senate than it would pass the House. That said, continued support for the PAST Act raises public awareness and adds the co-benefit of diminishing the practice of soaring. AHC will continue to keep you posted on any possible developments with the PAST Act on the off chance there's any significant movement this year. So that's the update on the PAST Act. Again, we really don't expect anything to happen this year, but to recap, the historic passage in the House is unprecedented, so we're very happy about that. And so moving on to the federal lands issue. In late July, House lawmakers adopted the Great American Outdoors Act of 2020 by a vote of 310 to 107. This 3-1 victory followed overwhelming passage in the Senate, where it was adopted by a vote of 73 to 25 in June. The horse industry sent more than 1,000 letters to Capitol Hill during a period of 4 months to support this landmark bill. Lawmakers described the Great Outdoors Act as a recreation package and have incorporated elements of legislation on which the industry has lobbied for the past 3 years. These include key provisions of the Restore Our Parks Act and robust funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. During meetings in the Senate in February, Senate staff received input from the American Horse Council, much of which is reflected in the final law. Senate staff correctly predicted that a final package would cross the finish line before the election. So this has been a long time coming. Passage of the Great American Outdoors Act is the culmination of 2+ years of lobbying, incorporating funds for the backlog maintenance of public trails, and also increased resources for important conservation projects that promote horseback riding. So we are very pleased about this bill. The work there isn't finished yet. We still have to work on implementation, and our Recreation Trails and Land Use Committee is managing that process. Now, moving on to more of the, economic side of the equation. While monitoring changes to the labor market during COVID-19, the horse industry continues to explore ways to provide relief for ongoing labor shortages with a focus on the H-2B and H-2A guest worker programs. On the H-2B front, despite higher unemployment rates going up since April and rigid policies from the administration, AHC and its partners have successfully advocated for cap relief or flexibility for H-2B within the FY21 spending bill. Identical to the provision in last year's law, the current bill creates some visa flexibility. It gives DHS discretion to effectively double the number of visas authorized by law. That said, the administration has chosen not to be flexible this year. In March, DHS announced that it would release 35,000 supplemental visas instead of the 66,000 visas which the law actually authorizes. In April, as unemployment began to rise, DHS announced that it would continue to review H-2B, thereby delaying any possible release of supplementals. Since that time, the administration has stated it would suspend issuance of new non-immigrant visas, including H-2B, through the end of the year. So in addition to lobbying for more H-2B visas, HC also advocates for more flexibility on the agricultural visa front. Last fall, the American Horse Council met with White House officials to talk about proposed efficiencies to the H-2A program. During that meeting, AHC outlined ways to clearly insert the horse industry into the H-2A program. The White House Office of Management and Budget has been reviewing the final H-2A modernization rule since August, and as of Friday, it had not yet been released. And for those of you who don't work on these issues on a regular basis, the White House Office of Management and Budget, or OMB for short, is the final arbiter of all major federal regulations. So having meetings there is very strategic, and we do hope to at least get a final rule before the end of the year on H-2A that will have some of these streamlines that we've advocated for. So that's pretty much a recap on the guest worker shortages that we've been facing. Also, you've probably heard a lot during the past 6 months about the so-called CARES Act, which delegated to SBA the role of dispensing more than $650 billion of emergency loans to small business. Because most equine operations identify as small business and include many nonprofits, AHC and its allies have been working to fix the law's Paycheck Protection Program. As you probably know, Paycheck Protection offers low-interest loans for small business and 501c3 groups. Fortunately for the horse industry, The law further extends eligibility to independent contractors and other self-employed individuals. Importantly, the law provides that loans will convert to outright grants when the recipient uses half of the funds to make payroll and related costs. That original percentage was 75%, but we got it reduced to 50, which does create more flexibility. Although SBA has streamlined requirements for loan forgiveness, the agency has experienced delays in forgiving specific loans. This delay has created uncertainty for small business, including many equine operations. And even though lawmakers have reached an impasse over the next phase of economic relief, the horse industry and its partners have successfully advocated for some improvements. These include a set aside of funds for small and community banks that serve rural customers. It also includes a clarification from SBA that businesses receiving legal gaming revenues, including racetracks, would be eligible for Paycheck Protection. The original program excluded racetracks and other gambling operations. In May, AHC joined the Farm Bureau Federation and other ag groups to advocate for inclusion of 501c4, C6, and C5 groups within the scope of Paycheck Protection. The coalition has submitted many letters and talked to congressional leadership to pitch relief for farm groups and trade associations who classify as 501c5 and 6. Even though some progress has been made with respect to the bills recently introduced, no final package has yet crossed the finish line. That said, the chances for more changes to Paycheck Protection are uncertain as Congress and the White House remain at a standoff. Congress will not move another stimulus bill until after the election. Stay tuned for details coming up certainly after the election. So that's a recap of some of the issues we've been working on Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Brian. Does anyone have questions for Brian? Unmute yourself and ask your question. And while you're doing that, quick poll, how many of your organizations did receive some PPP? I'm just curious. I think some of our group did and some didn't. Anybody out there? Gary, Billy?
Billy.
Okay, good. Nice to see. Thank you. I appreciate that. We're really working hard on the C6s because we have a number of C6s in the equine industry that are looking for some relief. And I have talked to a couple of other executive directors who tell me even if they did get PPP money, they're a little reluctant to spend it because they don't know what the circumstances are going to be. So there's some interesting dynamics going on with that.
So I do have a question, Brian.
Yeah, Billy.
It kind of dovetails with what Julie was mentioning.
Yeah.
You know, we heard that in the case of C5s that you could get the PPP funding, but you may not get forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Do you know, have you heard anything lately? And with our bank, they're telling us that's not an issue, but
okay, well,
it's so fluid, I don't know.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been a lot of disparity depending on which bank you're dealing with, but there is no law currently that states that 501c5s are specifically eligible for the SBA loans. Just as some background information on Capitol Hill, we really have focused on C5s to support the ag groups, we meaning the American Horse Council and the Farm Bureau Federation. But one of the challenges there is that the Republicans have been reluctant to extend a 501c5 formally within the context of the new bill, because C5s not only include ag groups, but they also include labor unions, which of course, turns it into more of a partisan conversation.
I do know of at least one C5 that has been awarded forgiveness. So I know that that's happened at least once. So ours is good. But anyway, we'll see.
That's good. And any of those anecdotes that you have like that, Billy or Gary or others, please share those with us, because we're constantly being asked by folks over at the American Association of Executives if we can give them any anecdotes that they could use when they're meeting with congressional members to try to make their case.
And Billy, I think there was a lot more flexibility when the CARES Act first passed in very late March. That original bill, if not the law, actually stated that this was extended to all 501Cs. So during those first initial weeks, any C group classification could have skated through the process. Yeah. So there's some ambiguity there.
We're going to circle back in new business to talk a little bit about the effects of the pandemic on the show and competition sector of our industry. I've got a couple of questions I'm going to throw out to the group and just have a little bit of a dialogue. I'm hopeful that that we can ride through all this and not be too terribly injured by the economic conditions. But I'm also hoping that there were some silver linings and some bright spots. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more later on. Anybody else? Question for Brian? Okay, Brian, thanks. That takes me to Cliff. How are you this morning, Cliff? I see you're all dressed up, suit and tie.
Yeah.
It must feel funny to be dressed like that in your own little apartment.
It is.
He's wearing a pair of shorts, I'm sure.
I 100% am, and you all are witnessing the loss of, I don't know, 7 inches worth of beard. So that's the other. Now I have to wear a tie. I used to be able to pretend like I was, and nobody could tell the difference.
So Cliff, before you begin, I want to tell you, somebody called me yesterday to say, I think you shored off Samson's locks. He's lost his mojo.
maybe. But good morning, everyone. Thank you all for attending today's meeting. I've got a couple of kind of out of the box topics to discuss today for you all. So I'm going to try to narrow their focus to what is of interest to the show and competition world. We'll start off with our efforts with the USDA over the last 18 months. Conversations with the USDA over the last year and a half have been interesting. We continue to be frustrated with the lack of input that we have within the USDA collectively as the equine industry. Clearly, we don't rank very high on their priority list, and that has shown for years. None of that's really a surprise. Of note is the 69-day rule change. It's a rule that we have discussed here at the American Horse Council for many years, going on a decade, and there is no one is arguing against extending the CEM waiver for competition animals to 90 days as opposed to its existing 60-day waiver that we have now. That rule, though, has been stuck in the mud and has survived administrative changes. It has survived staff changes and continues to be in waiting. We were told at the beginning of this year that there would definitely be some movement on that rule and it would go out for public comment by the end of 2020. We are rapidly approaching the end of 2020 and then we still have not seen a rule. I have had conversations with USDA staff that are writing the rule, and there are several other rules in this package that all apply to the equine industry. None of them are significant. They have winnowed out all of the scary suggestions. And so now it basically is only the 60 to 90-day rule change. And even with that being as simple as it sounds, we still have not seen a rule yet. So I will continue to advocate for that and push for that on the regulatory side of things. Like I said, we're still in the air. As a part of that conversation, the American Horse Council in May reached out to the Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, and requested an opportunity to meet with him in person to discuss the nature of the USDA's perspective on the American equine industry. We feel like the USDA has not given us our due. We continue to feel that the equine industry is understaffed, or the equine sector within the USDA is understaffed. The programs within the USDA serving the equine industry are underfunded, and the scale of the horse industry in the United States is underappreciated by the USDA. lots of factors, lots of different branches, agencies within the Department of Agriculture. But the through line through all of these groups is that the horse industry is playing sixth fiddle. We don't even get second fiddle. And so that letter we did get a response. The response was, no, thank you, too busy. And we did not feel that was an appropriate response. And we decided to take our concerns to Capitol Hill. We've met with Senate and House leadership on the Senate and House ag committees. They're the guys that write the checks for the USDA. And we feel like we've had some very sympathetic ears on that front. We will continue to have conversations with congressional staff, and hopefully our conversations will bear fruit likely in the next year. Another important part of the conversations we've been having with the USDA is in regards to import-export. Many of your sectors and your organizations have individuals who travel internationally, or you host competitors from other countries. And that has become more complicated in the last couple of years. We've experienced a lot of staff turnover within the USDA, particularly in the field offices that deal directly with imported or exporting horses. And we've had a couple of very high profile incidences that have kept horses out of the country. The non-negative quarantine tests have proven to be very problematic for many horse owners who end up facing huge costs in having their animals detained or forcibly deported, and unfortunately, occasionally euthanized. We are collaborating with animal health officials at the state levels. We're working with AAP. We're working with importers, shipping agents, horse owners, breeders, sale barns, in an effort to form a coalition. We have formed a coalition. The American Horse Council has the importer working group, and we are collectively using the voice of that working group to raise awareness of these issues and hopefully get some of these issues resolved. We shot for the sky trying to get testing procedures changed. That did not go over so well. We are continuing conversations about the future of CEM testing, which is probably the biggest burden to entry for animals coming into the United States. But as far as glanders, during other diseases, we have been successful in getting the protocols the USDA uses changed. So now, instead of immediately getting a positive or false positive test result, rather than facing immediate euthanasia or deportation, animals now get the benefit of the doubt and get 14 to 28 days to test negative. That said, of every non-negative test we've had coming into the United States in the last 3 years, those animals have turned out to be free of the disease of concern. And so we are leveraging that information to try to get some answers as to why these animals are testing positive. The dressage world had a big hit with an animal that was resolved. Gratefully, that was resolved in a positive way. We had a fairly expensive barrel racing horse, so shipped from South America, that was not resolved. They just euthanized the animal. We have some show jumpers on both coasts over the last couple of years as well. And so, like I said, it's any sector, as the U.S. competition industry looks at our international neighbors to expand their business, the import-export problem situation will become more problematic. But we were working on it, and I'm positive that the conversations we're having will bear fruit moving forward. Next subject Julie asked me to discuss was disaster relief. The American Horse Council gets a lot of calls in regards to natural disasters. I would count the COVID-19 situation as a natural disaster. And Brian and Julia both commented on that. Another issue that certainly is impacting the horse industry, not getting as much news. The wildfires we've experienced over the last 18 months have been devastating. I mean, some parts of California, Colorado, are lost tremendous amounts of not only facilities and space, but horses themselves. The infrastructure can be replaced easily, but many people lost animals, and the well wishes and donations have become a major point of contention. The American Horse Council does not operate a giving system. We push everyone that calls asking where to donate to AAP's foundation, Foundation of the Horse, and their efforts. AAP also maintains a webpage with Red Cross and some other organizations that they tend to focus on big issues, hurricanes, flooding, those kinds of things. We saw a great response from AAP about the Puerto Rico and Houston hurricanes a couple of years ago. But local wildfires, it's tough for them to respond to. And so I don't know what your membership has experienced, but I've been following local Facebook group efforts that are regional or even state specific. And those seem to be growing and getting larger and larger, attracting national sponsorship support and persisting between events, which I think is the new trend right now. We're seeing a lot of organizations that are just assuming there's another wildfire on the horizon. So rather than raising money for a specific disaster, they're raising money for the perpetual situations they're likely to face. That said, all these groups, most of these groups just pop up out of nowhere. They don't have necessarily a national foundation to fall back on. There's no national organization structuring them in any way. And so my concern is that, we're going to start to see nefarious groups move into this space and start soliciting funding illegally, fraudulently. That said, I continue to, I will always suggest that if your membership or your organizations themselves feel the need to contribute to these efforts, try to do so through AAP Foundation or any other new alternatives that crop up, but right now that space is pretty empty on the national front. The last subject Julie asked me to discuss is microchipping in collaboration with the natural disaster issues we've been following. The number one concern is when people can't evacuate or fail to evacuate in time, they are told to release their animals, get them out of their fences, open gates, fill up all the water troughs and get out of Dodge. We had a discussion yesterday where somebody was saying that, they were panicking and spray painting phone numbers on the sides of horses as they let them go into the woods. And I will continue to remind everybody that collectively as an industry, we need to be supporting permanent identification. And the best way to permanently identify horses at this time is microchipping. We have not seen, we saw a fairly tremendous amount of growth in the microchipping area in 2018, 2019. That has seemed to have plateaued as several agencies implemented microchipping efforts, but have not, we haven't seen new organizations move into that or at the same level of mandate. That said, we still have a lot of horses that get chipped. We get a lot of visits on our horselookup.org page. We are continuing to maintain the horselookup.org page. I want to thank Harold Palmer for the efforts over the last couple of years. Jockey Club IT has been a great partner in that. We have we are always looking for new partners to join that program. We brought AKC, the American Kennel Club, approached me at AAP's meeting last December and was very adamant about wanting to join. And I said, well, we're not really a dog. We're catering to the horse world. And the AKC representative was adamant that they have a lot of horses in their program. And so, it's still a little bit of the Wild Wild West. We're still not horse specific in all these efforts, but I do think that we will see eventually more and more breed registries will require microchipping. And I assume as the competition space finds ways to make microchip numbers a value added product, we'll see more mandates come along the way there. And so as your all's organizations move in that direction, I ask that you consider joining the horselookup.org effort. It's easy, it's cheap, and it really does provide a valuable resource, especially moving into the future. So
Thanks, Cliff. I appreciate that. Just to put a little context on the microchipping, there are 7.2 million horses in the United States, according to our economic impact study. Horselookup.org has about 1 million horses registered through there. So we've got a good start at it, but as Cliff said, we really need to keep moving that along. Someone commented, as he said yesterday, about spray painting numbers on the side of a horse, and they said, well, the first rain is going to wash that paint away. So permanent identification is the way to go. So we want to encourage that. Anybody got questions for Cliff? Unmute yourself and ask the question. Oh, Cliff, you must have been a very thorough job there. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to the last item under old business. So I reported to you last year that we were working with the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, which is a coalition of outdoor recreation sports, hiking, biking, camping, fishing, boating, horseback riding, trail riding. And they have put forward the Personal Health Investment Today, or FIT Act, which will allow consumers to pay for physical activity expenses. They can range from sports fees to gym memberships to sporting goods equipment, using funds in a pre-tax medical account, like a health savings account or a flexible spending account. And this kind of came out of the desire to help mitigate obesity and to really emphasize prevention and wellness as a key to our healthcare system. And so I'm really pleased to tell you that it's had a lot of movement. There are 95 House co-sponsors on it right now, and it's very bipartisan. It's split almost exactly even between Democrats and Republicans. There are 14 Senate sponsors, and they are continuing to move that along. Now, for our particular industry, they have a few what they call luxury. So if you're on the phone, you can't see me doing my little quotes here in the air, luxury exclusions, which they define as golf, hunting, sailing, and riding facilities. So we went back to the sponsors of this and said, so how can we be part of this? And they said, well, it would not include things like riding lessons, but it would include up to $250 for equipment, because that's considered sporting equipment. So we're still on board with this thing and think that this could be of interest to people in our sector, in our industry. So if anybody has questions for me, I'm happy to address that. We're just going to continue to monitor this and keep everybody abreast of it.
Julie, this is Marianne.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi, I have a question because, again, in the horse-human interaction field, they're just sprouting out so fast, but I know a couple of folks that are focused on overweight people and helping them. And they specifically want, big horses that are quiet when they take their donations. Because they see obesity as a problem, and they are working on exercise physiology with them. And it comes out of, I think PATH would probably have a good model to follow, because they've been doing physiotherapy for so long. But the research is there to support how the proprioception between the horse and the rider changes. And so I think maybe submitting some of that data to Congress and Senate to show that it might be luxury if you're, at a hunt club out on the field, but it's not luxury if you're in a therapy program.
Yeah, very good point. Love to get that data. Send it to Brian and we'll funnel it over. And Mary Ann, at some point, I really want to make sure I introduce you to Ashley Harkins and Emily Stearns. Ashley is our director of the United Horse Coalition. Emily is our program manager for the Equine Welfare Data Collective. And it is not uncommon for them to get phone calls from someone who has a situation where they can no longer care for a horse. They're looking for a good foster or a good placement for it. And so if you are aware of people who are in need of horses of a particular type, that might be good to put on their radar. So they could do a little matchmaking. So Ashley or Emily, you want to add to that? Unmute. There you go.
I'm a professional at this, I swear. So yeah, I would encourage you, if you haven't signed up for our session at 1 o'clock, we're going to have a lot of players on that call that are actively involved in working towards setting up kind of matching situations. Direct placement is one of the places this is going. So kind of what the thoroughbred industry has done with working to rehome racehorses directly from race trainers to new owners without having to take custody of them. Direct placement is starting to take place in other breeds and kind of disciplines as well. So I really encourage you, feel free either sit in on the presentation at 1 o'clock, but you can always email Ashley or I directly at either uhc@horsecouncil.org or ewdc@horsecouncil.org. And we're happy to kind of pair you up with people in the equine welfare community that are working towards these matchmaking situations.
Thanks, Emily. Anybody else questions? Anything sort of in the old business category that we didn't cover that you want to talk about? Something you've got on your mind before we move to new business? Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. So are you guys seeing my screen? It's got the agenda for the new business section there. Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So here's what we had on our new business. We want to talk a little bit about the impacts of the pandemic on shows and competition, lessons we learned, actions we would take. Should we face a challenge like this again? I want to talk a little bit about diversity, equality, and inclusion, what's going on. We have a whole panel discussion about that tomorrow. So I want to make sure that we have a little bit of a conversation about that. And then lastly, on my list of things, I wanted to give you an update on our plans for an equine research summit. We were going to do that in 2020. The pandemic prevented that. So we've got a new strategy for getting that accomplished. And one of the recommendations out of this committee last year was that the AHC staff explore the idea of creating an incentive plan which would allow breed and discipline associations to collect $1 a ride, $1 an entry, $1 a registration, whatever they wanted to do, but collect some funds that would go into a pool for equine research and for the Equine Disease Communication Center. So I want to give you an update on where we are with that. So that's sort of my outline for this afternoon. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute there so I can go back and read the chat room, because when we started our conversation about COVID and the pandemic, there were some great comments coming in here, and I want to ask people to kind of share those with everyone in case some people can't read them. What I have heard, just to get the ball rolling, is that, of course, some competitions got postponed, some were canceled, many got delayed. But when the industry reopened and people could get back to showing, boy, were they eager to get out there. Entries were up in a lot of places. I talked to Craig Huffines, and I'll ask Eleanor to speak to that. He told me they had over 3,000 horses coming for the World Show, and they were struggling to figure out how to do the stabling.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. The AQHA postponed their Select Amateur World Show and also their Limited Amateur World Show. And what they decided to do was put them back in November and join them in with all the World Shows. So now they have their World Show, the Select Amateur World Show, the Limited, the Ranch and Heritage, and they've got them all in one place, which is a lot of horses and a lot of people. And so that's going to be a challenge into itself about socially distancing when they did put them all together. And there was a really good reason that they did postpone, as we're all experiencing. But the response is amazing among horse people. They want to get out again, as I mentioned in my chat. They want to, I think they see outdoors with horses as being a natural way to socially distance. And it's been pretty successful so far from what I can see. We've been going to some shows and sales, and gosh, the sale prices are up, the show numbers are good, and people are just happy to be there. And I think they are cautious and they're careful because they want them to keep going. But so far, so good. I guess we'll have a report back on the world shows, the AQHA world shows, and how they came off with so many people all together. But good.
So Eleanor, let me ask you this question. I'm going to ask others to comment on this too. Were there other aspects of AQHA that were either increased or decreased when people were stuck at home? At one point, Craig shared with me that registrations were coming in quite well because people were home and had time to catch up on their paperwork.
Yeah, I think for every negative that COVID has caused us, there's been some positives. And I don't mean there's anything positive about a pandemic, but what I'm saying is that people, I think they're riding more. I think the breeding is up. And if you look at what veterinarians are doing, and that kind of reflects what's going on in the industry, the breeding business was huge. They were busier than they've ever been, and registrations are good, and all those aspects are really, really good. What went down for a while was the veterinarians doing performance horse work, because as the shows went down, their jobs diminished too, but they're back up now too. So if veterinary medicine is a reflection of the horse industry, which it is, things are good.
Well, I'm going to ask Cliff to chime in because we were kind of tracking that ourselves at AHC. And what we heard was that people were postponing vaccinations. They were doing some things. But as soon as things started to open up again, boy, they had like a huge month, I think they told us, Cliff.
Yeah, the March, April, first half of May, I think a lot of veterinarians were unable to do non-emergency work or opted out of doing non-emergency work, and there were probably some owners who were worried about financial repercussions and choosing not to. So we did see a drop in a lot of things: Coggins testing, vaccinations, supplement sales went down for a short period of time. That said, end of May, end of June, it seemed like everybody caught back up again. And so there's a huge spike in veterinary services seen across the country. And so things for 2020, we'll have to wait and see. There is the talk of a third wave, but I think 2020 will average out to be about a normal year as far as localized barn services are concerned.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Billy, I'm gonna pick on you. How about over in your neck of the woods? How's the paint horse industry coming along?
So I would kind of echo some of the things that Dr. Green said. Obviously, we saw a sharp fall off early on, but then we saw it really take off. One of our key metrics is total number of entries across globally. And of course that collapsed, but then it really took off, and we may actually see some growth in total number of entries, which means there are obviously fewer events, but they've gotten much bigger. Just about every or been able to have was bigger, and bigger by a double-digit percentage than previous events. So there's obviously still some enthusiasm. There's some interesting conversation going on as well about, we know that the pandemic has expedited some growth in sales of houses and purchasing of land and building of houses outside of metropolitan areas. It may very well be that long term, as we see more and more people working from home, that gives some moms and dads extra time at home with their kids. There could be an opportunity for the horse industry long term, as these organizations decide people can work from home more efficiently. I just think about our area in Fort Worth. You're talking about commutes of an hour to 3 hours a day, maybe longer. Well, what if you had all that time at home and you didn't have that drive time? What would you do? And so we're starting to see anecdotally some moms and dads say, well, you know, we might be able to get back in the horse industry, or we might be able to introduce our kids to this kind of thing. So there could be, to echo Dr. Green, you don't ever want to say good things that came from the pandemic, but there's always serendipity, and we may see that, we may see some of that occur. But certainly our business is surprisingly good given the circumstances.
That's great, Billy. And I'm excited that you're thinking about this in a forward-thinking way, marketing and that kind of thing. You know, we get calls all the time from people who think about the reduction in breeding and the decline we saw during the recession, and they were fearful we were going to see that as we went through this pandemic. But based on what you're saying to me, it may have slowed down initially, but then it ramped right back up, and we may actually have a positive trajectory in some respects. I'm really hopeful that that's going to be the case for us in some areas.
Well, our registrations are up about 15%.
Wow.
Now, we had thought and still think that maybe we give some of that back in the final quarter of the year, but we haven't seen that in October yet. It's still pretty steady. So I still think we give some of it back in November and December because people are just able to they were expediting some of their work because they weren't going to shows. But it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And interestingly enough, we were about 15% down in transfer of ownership in March, and we're up about 2 or 3%. And as soon as shows started to re-engage, those ownership transfers spiked, and that just shows you how much commerce goes on at horse events, how much buying and selling of horses actually occur on the ground at these events. So yeah, it's an incredibly odd year,
to say the least.
Yeah, there are some things I would not have predicted that have come true, and some things that surprised me, but you just never know. But it's interesting.